also uploaded to YouTube, and I sent you a link for the YouTube recording for last week. I won't normally do that. There's a link on the OneNote document, and they all just follow in with one playlist. There's also previous year's recordings as well, if you're so inclined. Okay, so that's the recording and the transcription started. So as I said, this week we are going to talk about governance. Not surprisingly, with a course that's about governance, risk and compliance, we're just going to do them in those order. Why not? So we're going to start talking about governance, what governance is, what it does, what we should be doing with it, all that kind of stuff. And probably to do that, we want to talk about what governance isn't. So let's think about our organizations. And I said last week that I'll try and use the word organization because governance applies in all sorts of areas, whether it's a business, a non-profit, a charity, a public body, whatever. So I'll try and remember and say business, but if I occasionally say, I just did it. I'll try and say organization, but if I occasionally say business or something, mentally in your head, just extend it to all of them. So governance in most organizations has a key component in achieving the organization's aims. So let's think about how organizations are set up. And most of you will be familiar with an organization that has multiple layers. You know, the person who works in the call center has a supervisor, and the supervisor has a manager, and the manager has a director, and the director has a managing director. So there are different layers in that organization. But I want to be very clear before we start. That's not governance. That's management. That's how do we manage the business of the organization? How do we get the day-to-day stuff done? Who's in charge of who? That's not what governance is. Governance is different. Governance is thinking about what the organization is, what the organization should be or could be, and trying to put in place aims and policies that get to that. The management is how that's then implemented. So governance is more than just management. It's about ensuring that the organization is properly set up, but that setup doesn't disadvantage anyone. By which I mean there are lots and lots, and I have to use this word because I can't think of a better one, but I really don't like it. There are lots and lots of stakeholders, people who have an interest in the organization. Part of the reason I don't like it is because it's so overused. You can't read a document without seeing stakeholder there 20 times. But as I say, if anyone can think of a synonym, please let me know because I'd love to use it. And governance is about taking cognizance of all of those different stakeholders and figuring out how the organization can best serve them. Now, sometimes that's reasonably easy. Charlotte says shareholder, but of course, shareholder might only be one type of stakeholder, and it's certainly only one for a business. Charities don't have shareholders. Government doesn't have shareholders unless you count all of us as being a shareholder. So there are different people with interests in it. Shareholders certainly are one. If it's a business that you're talking about, then if the business collapses, then it doesn't matter how the governance was set up. If there's no business to work with, then what difference does it make? But there are wider considerations. There are plenty of examples where management have tried to appease shareholders and only shareholders, but in doing so have run down the business so much that it is impossible for it to continue. There's a term called leveraged buyout. where you can buy an organization basically on tick. So you go out, you get a big loan, you buy an organization, and then you pay off the loan from the profits that you make. Do any of you remember Comet? It sold electrical goods and white goods and all that kind of stuff. They were in pretty much every industrial estate in the country at one point. And then there was a leveraged buyout. So a group, an external group, got together the cash to buy Comet, had a huge loan, used the income they got to pay off the loan, and not, by the way, pay a lot of dividends to shareholders. But once they'd done all that, there was nothing left to put back into the business. There was nothing left to make the shops look better, to advertise, to get more people in. So eventually, as Ali points out, they went bust. And they went bust very clearly because they only took note of one stakeholder, in this case, shareholders. They didn't start to think about the employees. They didn't think about anyone else who had any sort of interaction. They didn't think about customers. Well, they're doing the right thing for customers, so clearly not, because the customers stopped coming. So it isn't just shareholders. It's anyone who has an interest in the organisation. And any organisation who thinks it is just shareholders will not be long for this world. If you haven't read the Ratner story that James is pointing out in the chat, do go read it. It's quite interesting how one bad joke can destroy a whole company, which is exactly what happened. Ali says the scenario that I'm describing is widespread, and I would agree. It's far too widespread. The term, I think, is vulture capitalism. People going in and picking over the bones of anything where they can make themselves money with no thought as to what happens after that. Most commonly seen when employees are then thrown out of jobs. Of course, as Ali rightly points out, the assets are simply stripped, sold off, and then you're left with nothing. And it can happen whether it's a deliberate tactic or whether it's an unforeseen consequence. I don't know if any of you are on Twitter or take any notice of social media, but Twitter was recently bought by Elon Musk, who thought that basically Elon Musk is a far-right nutcase who thinks that, yeah, that's editorializing, but you know, can't wait till somebody sees this and he starts to sue me, who thinks that all speech is fine. Who thinks that you can say anything, anywhere, anytime, and anyone who stops you doing that is just a lefty retard who shouldn't be allowed to live. Well, that's fine if that's what he believes, but if you run a company whose reason for being is to allow people to talk, and that company has spent a lot of time trying to not silence, but certainly to try to point out when some of the things that are said are incorrect, to suddenly open it up to allow anybody to say anything at any time has huge consequences. So the consequences for Twitter is that uses of the N-word went up about 66%. Racism went up 300%. All this kind of hate speech went up. And I'm sure that from Elon Musk's worldview, that's fine. Well, if that's what people are saying, that's what people are saying. It's not up to me to police it. Except he lives in a corporate world. And all the advertisers on Twitter went, do I really want my advertising to be beside a whole bunch of people who are saying that, I don't know, blacks shouldn't exist, or whatever the other nonsense is that they put up? And of course, the answer to that is no, because they have a corporate responsibility to say what gives us the best chance of getting more sales. And the best chance of getting more sales does not include getting involved in racism. So they pulled all their advertising. Advertising at Twitter is now about 40% of what it was before Musk took over. So you've now got the point where there are auctions of office equipment from Twitter. They've stopped paying landlords for their offices, and they're in a huge trouble. So from looking at the shareholder, in this case it's one, it was Elon Musk who says, yeah, we're going to do what the shareholder wants to do. We now have an issue where they have destroyed the platform, destroyed relations with other stakeholders, including the people who place ads with them, destroyed their relationships with employees because they have sacked many of them and estranged almost all that are left. Other stakeholders include their suppliers, including people that give them offices. And, well, not give, but rent them offices. Because if you stop paying someone at that point, it becomes difficult to then get other supplies. Hello, we'd like to buy a widget, please. Oh yeah, you're that company that doesn't pay their rent. No, give me the money now and then I'll send it. But I'm not sending it to you in the hope that I'll get paid sometime. So that whole diversion was simply saying it's not just about stakeholders. It's about how you're perceived in the outside world. It's about relationships with suppliers and customers. It's about relationships with the wider public. It's about the legislative framework. Because one of the things that Musk allowed on Twitter was Holocaust denialism. There are very strict laws about that in Germany, not surprisingly. The only surprise is that there aren't very strict laws about it everywhere. And by allowing all this stuff to go on, he has destroyed the brand. He's destroyed the company that he spent £44 billion on. I think that's a textbook example of poor governance. Decisions weren't taken in the best interests of all the stakeholders. They were taken in the narrow interest of one specific stakeholder. And without taking into account what was happening in the wider world, they've managed to destroy the company. Yeah, it's not destroyed, but it's certainly well on its way. That example continues with the rest of the stuff that's on that slide. The stuff that they did wasn't fair. Ben, you're far too late to short Twitter. It's already lost more than half. I think it's about 2/3 of its value by now. When you are running an organization, you have to think about all the stakeholders. And for sure, if it's a business, shareholders are one of those, definitely. You don't have a business without them. But you also don't have a business without all the other stakeholders as well. And you have to ensure that what you do for that organization is fair for all of those stakeholders, that everyone knows what you're doing, that there's no kind of hidden stuff going on in the background. And that when things happen, you know why they've happened, who made that decision, and why. So there's accountability all the way through. Sorry, I'm just smiling at the chat that's going on. I think Charlotte's quite right. Yes. If you want to talk about again value, the thing in the chat's about Mark Zuckerberg, who did such a terrible job with Facebook. And the reason I say it's a terrible job is he made lots of money, and but with an incredibly poor product that is now failing. He sees that it's failing. He pivots to a new thing called Meta, and his share price tanks. But I have no sympathy at all for the shareholders, because the shareholders in large part bought shares in Facebook, but granted Zuckerberg, in essence, a magic share. In other words, he was allowed to do what he wants. They were sold non-voting shares, so they got money back if the company made money, but they weren't allowed any say in how the company was running, which, while it was bringing in loads from advertising, they thought was fantastic. And now that it's not, and now that there's all the issues in terms of governance, because you can't just sell people's information. Excuse me. You can't just sell people's information, or in the case of Cambridge Analytica, allow it to be stolen and not have any consequences. They thought that this sort of stuff didn't apply to them. And of course, it very clearly does. So we need principles, we need principled governance, we need to figure out what exactly is right and wrong, what we're going to do and when. And that's not just about management. That's not just about who do we get to cover on Saturday morning. That's about the outlook of the organisation, its processes, its rules, its procedures, its whole how it wants to be. So as I said, it's quite often I'll talk about organizations. Sometimes I forget to talk about businesses. There are, of course, differences. Businesses have to make profit. Organizations often don't. But we do sort of hit some terminological inexactitudes as we go through, as you quite rightly pointed out. So we'll try and meander through those, and we'll try and make them clear where they come across. But the principles tend to stay the same, because it doesn't matter what type of organization it is. So for example, here is a public sector organization, specifically a government. So if we look at a government like Westminster, we have a government that sets a strategy and a direction. It runs on a manifesto that says this is what we're going to do. It then hands that over to civil servants, and they manage that. They organise how that's going to work, and then the civil servants themselves implement that. So we've got those different layers. So we've got governance, management, and implementation. We see similar things in other types of organisation. Here's something, anybody on the CPD people, anybody involved in health? No. You all gave me personal emails rather than work emails, so I couldn't even work it out. For those of you that don't know, there is a push towards integrating health care and social care. The idea being that it makes more sense to have people who aren't actually ill not being in hospital, but to be cared for at home, in order for people who are ill to be able to be cared for in a hospital. Oh, David works in health. Okay, so you'll know quite a bit about this. Healthcare is looked after by health boards, and there are various health boards throughout Scotland. You know, Greater Glasgow Health Board, Ayrshire and Arran Health Board, Highland Health Board, that kind of stuff. Oh, Rachel works with the NHS. Good. You'll know even more about this than I do, so I'm suddenly feeling quite exposed here. So tell me if I get it wrong. So healthcare is looked after by the health boards. Social care is looked after by local councils. So that's a function of, you know, Glasgow City Council, Edinburgh City Council, Fife Council, whatever it happens to be. So if you're going to put together health and social care, you have to have a clear view of how that's going to happen. You have to have a strategy and a direction for how that's going to work. So what was created was something called an Integrated Joint Board, that IJB that you see at the top of the screen now. That Integrated Joint Board sets a strategy and direction for health and social care in the areas where they work. That's then organised by two different organisations. The councils look after the social care part, and the health boards look after the healthcare part, but all running under the same strategy and direction created by this joint board. And of course, all implemented by a whole bunch of people on the ground who go around helping people every single day. So again, governance, what the strategy and direction for doing this is. Management, councils for social care, health board for healthcare, and civil servants who then do. If you've got a business, the same sort of thing will happen. You'll have a board at the top, a board of directors, say, who will set a strategy and a direction. We want to grow the business 10%. Therefore, we want to open another 10 shops selling our stuff. Now, the board say that's what we want to do. That's our aim. That's our strategy. But they're not running about the country looking for new places to set up a shop, or the best place to set up a shop, or thinking about how the supplies will go to that shop, or how they're going to hire people for that shop. That's left to management to organise all of that. And of course, then that will finally be implemented by operations. The people who actually go out and buy a shop or lease a shop, the people who then go in and fit the shop, the people who then set up the supplies to the shop. So we've got different types of organisations with different nomenclature. Is it a board? Is it an IJB? Is it a government? Are they civil servants or operations staff? It doesn't really matter. We still have this pyramid where we have the strategy and direction set from the top, organised in the middle, before being implemented. We're all okay with that before we move on. You see, there's clearly a difference between setting the aims of what an organisation does and then how you go about implementing those aims. Ali said, are there any aspects of governance that I think are good from Musk or Zuckerberg? I always actually said Must or Zuckerberg, and I quite fancy those names. I would prefer them to be called Must and Zuckerberg. I think Zuckerberg, something good about that. No, there isn't. I can think of nothing positive to say about the current governance of Twitter. I could say positive things about the previous governance of Twitter, even though they got a lot of things wrong. That wasn't because of they weren't trying to get things wrong. They weren't set up to get it wrong. It's just that when you're in that kind of business, it's very easy to get things wrong. It's hard to look after 1 billion users and not have some of them be upset. But they always try to take decisions in the right way with the right outcomes. They didn't always get it right, but that's fine. Which of us can say that we ever got anything right? The reason I'm so critical of the current governance of Twitter is because of throwing all of that out. They haven't thought about what proper governance is. And Musk, of course, has form for this. He's currently involved in a court case. As you probably know, he also owns Tesla. At one point, he sent out a tweet that said, considering taking Tesla private, Binance in place. So if you own a share in Tesla and you've got the guy who runs Tesla saying he's going to take it private, in other words, he's going to buy all of the public shares, what does that mean for the share that you own? Do you keep it, sell it, buy more? Problem was, Musk never actually was going to take the company private. So a whole load of people bought and sold shares based on what he'd said when there was absolutely no chance of that happening. That's poor governance. Sometimes governance is about not saying things as much as it is about saying things. I'm equally as critical about Zuckerberg because they also made no attempt to do things right. So previously on Twitter, I thought they did try and do things right, even though they sometimes got it wrong. I saw no evidence that Facebook even tried to do things right. The only thing they were focused on was, how do we get more people in? How do we get more ads sold? So unless you want to give me an example, Ali, I can't think of anything that we're doing well, or anybody else for that matter. So Anthony's asked for the middle stage of the pyramid. Is that referring to how the strategy given at the top level that's implemented at the bottom level? And by the way, even though the pyramids are set up like that, I'm well aware of the pejorative, people at the bottom level, because they're not at the bottom level, they're just other people doing different things. It's just that there are more of them, so you see it wider in the pyramid. And that's not a criticism of you, Anthony, because I'm sure I said it earlier as well. I just wanted to make it clear that I don't see it as that. There's leadership and implementation rather than top and bottom. But yes, what you've said is right. So the strategy set at the top will be organised by management in the middle and then implemented by those in operations, those on the ground. That's exactly how it would be. And there has to be discussion here. Otherwise, well, I gave the example earlier of, okay, we want to have 10% more shops. The theory being we'll make 10% more profit. What if they said, oh, we want 100% more shops because we can make 100% more profit? Is that doable? Do we have enough staff to double our capacity of shops? Do we have enough staff to do it properly? Is there enough flexibility in the market to require double the number of shops? Do we have enough customers? Would they pay enough? So there has to be trust and communication here between board and management. There's no point in board setting unsustainable goals, which management are well aware can't be done. You know, if somebody comes to me and says, can you grow your sales by 10% in a year? You kind of go, well, I wonder how I could do that. And you start thinking, well, maybe if I do this, maybe if I do that, maybe we could make this change. If someone comes to you and says, I want to grow sales twice as much within a year, I'm actually more likely to sit back and go, seriously? How? And then not do anything at all. So there is a balance here. But yeah, Anthony, you're right. They'll set the strategy, they'll organise getting it done, and then it will be implemented. Any other questions before we move on? Next thing I'm going to talk about is about the strategy and direction. Sometimes, and it's sometimes something that's derided, because a mission statement. Organisations are keen on mission statements because, done well, they say exactly what an organisation should be doing. You can come in the morning, look at a mission statement, and say, yeah, okay, that's what we're doing today. So there's two there: dream, believe, achieve, and then the longer one that I'm not going to read out. Which one do you think, better? Again, there's a poll meant to pop up there, and it hasn't done it for some reason. I'm not entirely sure why. Hang on. Oh, I see. Teams has updated. How kind of Teams. Right, hang on, it's just updating for me. Right, so which of those do you think is better? The first one or the second one? You should see the poll both popping up on your screen and in the chat. And I know how many people are in this meeting, so I know how many people aren't responding. Oh, second is well in the lead, from about a 2/3 response so far. Okay, so most of you think the second longer one is the best. In which case, I suppose my simple question is why? So again, you get another poll popping up. Just type in a word or two about why you think it's better, and we'll see if there's any sort of agreement on why that's the case. And again, you'll see the poll pop up on your screen and in the chat, and the results will be in. Okay, no need to shout. So I think what we're starting to see is that you like the idea that it's clear about what you're supposed to be doing. The first one's a bit too airy-fairy, because it can apply to anything really. I suppose there's also the question about whether the first one is actually true. Last night I dreamt I could fly. So if I believe that I fly, will I be able to achieve it? Not sure. Somebody can test that, and no, do not test that. Um, so Yeah, so it's about details, it's about specifics, it's got about goals. And I think that's entirely reasonable what you've put there. Oh, I'm sorry. Um, sure, it's made my eye water. Um, so the first one's a nice advertising slogan. The second one's a better mission statement, possibly. And we can have this problem with organizations that try to reduce what they want to do to sound bites. Doesn't always work. To help make every brand more inspiring and the world more intelligent. I mean, that sounds fantastic. Wouldn't you just love to work for a company that makes every brand more inspiring and the world more intelligent? When you find out that it's Avery and what they do is they make sticky labels, I'm not entirely sure that I believe them, though. Our mission is to operate the best specialty retail business in America, regardless of the product we sell. Now, you'll notice that there's an ellipsis in there. This mission statement goes on for what seems like pages and pages. To say that our mission exists independent of the products we sell is to demean the importance and the distinction of being booksellers. That's a mainly American company called Barnes and Noble who sell books. Well, at least they seem to be proud of being booksellers, but regardless of the products they sell means they don't really want to be booksellers. So I'm not quite sure what their plan is here. Do they want to be booksellers? Do they not? Are they quite happy to be booksellers if it brings them some money, but they'd rather be in another space? Last time I was in a Barnes and Noble, I bought a T-shirt. Thanks, David. I think I should get some rest too. Um, we'll struggle through this one though, I think. Um, MGM Resorts International is a leader in entertainment and hospitality. Well, what they've put up there isn't an aim, it's a statement. And yes, mission statements clearly are statements, but it's a statement of the mission. The mission should be an aim. What is it we're trying to do? So some people, of course, are better at it. A world without Alzheimer's disease. Okay, I know what you're trying to do. Very clear. I don't know how you're going to do it, but it's very clear what you're trying to do. Fair enough. Realizing the full potential of the internet, universal access to research and education, full participation in culture to drive a new area of development, growth, and productivity. Yeah, okay. I know what you're trying to do. And I particularly like the third one, better health and well-being for all Australians now and for future generations. I like it because the first clause is really clear, but I also like it because it makes clear that it's not just about putting a sticking plaster on things and sorting stuff now. It's about how do we actually make things better in future. Okay, so here's a wee uh, test for you. It's not a test, it's just to see if you'll come across them. So we'll do the same thing. You'll see a poll pop up. Again, if you know the organization, just type it in. And these are the three mission statements. If you think you recognize them, just pop them in and we'll see if we and put the number against it, 1, 2, 3 uh, for the bullet points there, if you happen to know who they are. Even if you don't know, if you don't know, guess. This is an anonymous poll. So if you want to put it in a poll, if you want to put it in the chat, whatever. But I'm happy with a guess, even if you don't know. No guesses whatsoever. Okay, let's take them in turn. The first one says we can be relied upon to collaboratively negotiate crowdsourced infrastructures to meet the needs of an ever-changing marketplace. Even if you don't know who it is, what kind of company do you think that's going to be?
Would it be a computing cloud company?
Computing cloud company. So you've got crowdsourced infrastructures, ever-changing marketplace. Yeah, that would make sense. The biggest response to the poll is no idea. What about the second one? We have committed to authoritatively customize scalable deliverables to reach new levels of customer service. Any idea what type of organization that is? No. Or even want to make a guess at what type of organization that might belong to? Amazon, says Mel. Kickstarter? Kickstarter's an idea. Um, yeah, I'm afraid this is just my idea of a poor joke. They're from something called the mission statement generator, which is somebody who's fed up with all of these nonsensical mission statements that lots of companies put in place and come up with a mission statement generator to come up with what seem vaguely plausible mission statements, but ones that don't actually have a company attached to them. Which is my way of saying be careful when you're doing these things, because sometimes a bad mission statement can be worse than having none at all. Okay, so we're roughly halfway through both the time that we have and the lecture. Excuse me. Which seems like a reasonable time to take a break. You reckon? So, shall we take 10 minutes and I'll go and make my fruit tea warm again and I'll see you back here in 10. Okay, and we're back. Hope you all had the chance to grab yourselves a cup of tea. Raspberry and cranberry, if you're wondering. The raspberry and strawberry was awful. Not recommended. Okay, so let's continue talking about governance, and we'll get back into actual governance. One of the key components about governance is setting up the framework by which the organization will be run. And that should encompass all of the stakeholders, both internal and external. So there's an example given there on the slide. It could be people that give you money, customers, management, employees, government, the community. All of those things should be thought of when you're setting up your governance structure. And that's because one of the things you have to be really clear on is what will happen with all of these people. What is the contract that you have between all of these different stakeholders when you carry out excuse me, the business of your organization? And how, when those contracts that you have between different stakeholders, when they clash, who wins, and how do you decide who wins? How do you actually get to the point where you can decide who is going to benefit from any particular place? So we need those processes and policies in place. We need to decide how they're going to be interpreted in any particular instance. And then we need to make sure that they're actually followed. There's no point having these things there and then not doing them. So we need procedures in place to figure out who's actually going to make sure that these things are happening. Who's going to be told that they've happened? Will there be reports about how it's worked? And if so, who gets them and how often and what should be in them? And we'll look a wee bit about that type of information later on when we look at some of the more specific governance documents that you'll already find on your module materials. Now, you remember from the triangles that those people that are setting the strategy and the direction might have different names. We're just going to talk about them as a board. It could be called anything. A board, a committee, a council, a cabinet. It really doesn't matter. Their function and their responsibilities stay the same. To set up that governance framework, to ensure that everyone in the organisation knows what the aims of the organisation are, and to put in place the correct procedures for ensuring that that happens. Now, you can only do that if you actually know how an organisation should work. So it's really helpful if, for example, at board level, or committee level, or council level, or cabinet level, whatever you want to call it, that you actually have some core skills. It's all very well saying how you're going to run the IT in your organisation. But if you don't actually have any IT experience, how do you know if you're setting the correct policy? How do you know if the policy that you have created is being well implemented? How do you know if it's been implemented at all? If you don't have any HR experience, how do you know whether the HR part of the organisation is doing what it's supposed to be doing? How do you know that it's following the legislation around hiring and firing of employees? How do you know that you're doing all the proper things? Yes, you have management in place and you've appointed them to do that. But unless you have some sort of knowledge about how that's supposed to work, how can you possibly scrutinise the reports that you get back from that management and understand whether or not it's doing what you would hope it would do? So it's really important that in any board there's a range of skills for all sorts of areas of the business. And you'll see that quite often when you see adverts for these types of things. You might see an advert that says, we wish to appoint a new board member. It would be particularly helpful if they had prior accounting experience or prior HR experience or prior, whatever it happens to be, to provide that skill, to build on that mix of skills that's in the board already. As well as having those skills that they bring to that work, it's important that boards are free of encumbrance. They shouldn't be thinking, well, what happens if I make this decision? Will somebody else be upset at me? Because remember what I said, you have a duty to the organisation. So the board must be independent and make those decisions independently of any other consideration. We've seen an example just yesterday. The news came out that the chair of the board of the BBC, who was appointed by the then Prime Minister, was at that time key to putting in place a loan facility for that same Prime Minister. Is there a clear independence there when the same person who is appointed was also setting up a loan? Could there seem to be a clash there? Well, yes, which is why the recruitment is very clear to say, if you have a conflict of interest, you must declare it beforehand. And the fact that those conflicts of interest were never declared are just as bad as the fact that it happened. Because people on the board must look after the organisation, not look after people outside the organisation. They have to be independent. They have to be rigorous. They have to be clear on what their job is, and they have to take it seriously. They can't just turn up for a board meeting, look to the chair of the board to say, what we're voting for? Aye, okay, yeah, right, that's fine. Well, we vote against this, right? Okay, no, I'm not going to vote. They have to be rigorous in what they do. They have to read the papers. They have to understand the business. They have to gather their own information if they're required to, if there's not enough information given to them, to be sure that the decisions that they are taking are actually to the benefit of the organisation. Now, that's different from making the wrong decision. We've all made wrong decisions. But you should make the wrong decision from the right place, which is you've considered all the evidence and then decided on a way forward. And how you make that decision should be really clear. So you have to be transparent in what you do. And that brings us back to the BBC one, or the other one that popped up at the weekend, when the person in charge of the revenue and customs was simultaneously in discussions about how much tax they should pay. Well, I don't know about you, but I'm not entirely sure I could be entirely independent when I was talking to my boss about how much tax they should pay. I'm also pretty sure that that should be something that we should know. So it was neither independent, nor rigorous, nor transparent. And it certainly wasn't competent. The people on the board were not competent when they did that. If they had a problem, they should not have taken it on. Incompetence is a big issue. Let me give you an example. And I know I seem to be picking on Westminster, but they do make it so easy. For the UK government, the board is the cabinet. So that's the set of MPs who are taking the day-to-day decisions. And there's people there for different parts of the government. Foreign Secretary, Home Secretary, whatever it happens to be. So they have responsibility for those parts of policy. And at one point, Dominic Raab, who's currently the Justice Secretary, was the UK Foreign Secretary. Now, I've just said that people should be competent and have a range of skills.
We want a bespoke arrangement on goods which recognises the peculiar, frankly, geographic economic entity that is the United Kingdom. We are, and I hadn't quite understood the full extent of this, but if you look at the UK and you look at how we trade in goods, we're particularly reliant on the Dover-Calais crossing. And that's one of the reasons why, and there's been a lot of...
The Foreign Secretary didn't realise that Britain is an island and that things have to cross water to get here. I'm not entirely sure that that hits the competence threshold, but I'll leave you to make up your own mind. So what we're looking for on the board, we're looking for board members who have a range of skills so they can bring those skills to the board. So if management come to the board and say, well, here's what's happened and why, you should have someone on the board who has experience in that and can challenge management on what they're doing and why. The ethical standards for the board must be of the highest level, and for that reason, most organizations have a code of conduct. We'll talk about this more, but there's two ways to approach a lot of this stuff. One is the kind of traditional approach, which is, oh yeah, I went to school with him, he's fine, don't worry about it. And the other is, no, write it down because we don't trust anybody. For a long time, the former has held sway. We don't need to legislate because I went to school with him. We don't need to legislate. I played rugby with his brother. We don't need to legislate, all that kind of nonsense. We're moving, thankfully, towards a place where we're saying, no, we need to legislate and we need to actually make clear what people need to do because they seem to have forgotten it. So things like codes of conduct for staff are clearly laid out in what's expected. As I said, there should be transparency. If you serve on more than one board, it should be really clear that you have a possible conflict of interest. If you have shares in an organization like a private health company, should you be serving as a health board employee? Or is there a problem there? Is that a conflict of interest? Assuming you've actually made it clear in the first place. So let me give you an example. Here's an actual ad, and it's for a non-executive director. Now, if you're not clear about business, an executive director will be there on a daily basis. They will actually take a hand in running the business on a day-to-day basis. A non-executive director won't do that. So an executive director is on that cusp between management and governance. A non-executive director is only governance. So this was for Highlands and Islands Airport. And you can see, excuse me, that it specifies many of the things that we've been talking about all along. It's asking for people who can lead. Well, there's a surprise. People at the top. Oh, for goodness sake. People at the top should be able to lead. But they should do it and be prudent and effective. And They should manage risk. So already in the very first line of this advert, we've got governance and we've got risk. If it had said compliance instead of controls, we would have had the trifecta. You have to set values and standards. You have to look after all the stakeholders. So that includes shareholders, but it's also communities and others. You know, if you're an executive director at an airport, the shareholders might want to say, can we have lots more flights, and I don't care if they land at 2 a.m. And the people living beside the airport say, you want flights to land at 2 p.m.? You're kidding. At 2 a.m., you're kidding. They have to set strategic aims, but not in a vacuum. So they work within a framework. In this particular case, it's a national performance framework. Highlands and Islands Airports is a wholly owned company that's owned by the Scottish Government. So it's set up to be independent, to work independently, but it still is part of public ownership. So it has to align to the Scottish Government's national performance framework. It's part of the board's job to make sure that the finances are there and people are there to meet the objectives. And they should oversee performance. All the stuff that we've been talking about so far. I said earlier that they should have some knowledge, and that's one of the things that the person appointed to this board should have, knowledge of the Highlands and Islands Airports framework document. In other words, don't apply for this if you haven't read this document and understood what it is the HIA are supposed to do. This one can be overlooked quite easily. Contribute. So as I say, you don't want people turning up, being on a board simply because they get a glass of wine afterwards. They have to understand the organisation, understand the issues that are up for discussion, contribute on either side of those issues before a final decision is made. In other words, you have to prepare. You can't just turn up and hope for the best. You prepare for that meeting and attend it. Not just the board, but the committees. So we said earlier that you might have specific skills. Well, if you have specific skills, maybe you set up different subcommittees. Maybe one bunch of people looks after HR and another bunch of people looks after accounts. So you can subdivide a board into subcommittees in order to advance what you're doing. Not all organisations do that. Some organisations do it all the time. But it's a perfectly reasonable approach. I can't concentrate. I'm looking out Sally's window and it just looks lovely out there. It looks so good. Cold or not, I just want to be out in that field.
Yeah, we're lucky where our office is.
Ali's pointing out some of the qualifications you might need. And Mel's quite right, that there'll be a skills matrix often used to identify gaps. So I've said before that you might see adverts that said we need HR or we need IT, and that's quite right. You should have a matrix that says we need people who know about this, 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 and this. And hopefully some people will have more than one tick. So my background clearly is IT, but on the other hand, I have run businesses and I have been involved in the public and the private sector. So I have management experience in both of those and have board level experience of both of those. So I have extra ticks. And that's good. If you can get somebody with lots of experience, great. On the other hand, HR wouldn't be one of the things I would tick against. So if somebody was looking specifically for that, then I couldn't do it. So it's not just internal meetings, there'll be other things. You might have to represent the organisation elsewhere, either to specifically represent them, in other words, to be there to speak for the organisation, or because you've been given information to the organisation and you're the person there to get it. And then a more nebulous one, active support. What is active support? What does promote commitment mean? It just means that you should be a person in the organisation that actually believes in the organisation and will continue to say that this is a good organisation doing what it should do. You should be supporting everything that's in the organisation's aims. Not finished yet? You should be contributing to the corporate plan. So I said that one of the things that you should be doing is strategy. What is the organisation's aims? What do we want to get to? And one of the things we'll do with that is to create a plan. Here's where we are, here's where we want to be, and here's how we're going to get there. In this particular case, because it's owned by the government, there's extra things. How does that contribute to national outcomes? So national outcomes might be that we want to increase the availability of travel to all areas of the country. That might be one national outcome, which says for an airport, well, good, let's get more flights going. But another national outcome might be we're kind of worried about climate change and we want to encourage people to use public transport other than planes. So one of your national outcomes might be, let's have fewer flights going from this airport. How do you balance those national outcomes within the organisation? The answer, of course, is you do what's right for the organisation. So national outcomes affect it, but the organisation itself is what comes first, because when you serve on that board, that's your first thought. Not surprisingly, the board approve the accounts. What was that? I don't think that was actually a contribution. It doesn't bother if somebody's knocked something over. Oh, Mel's getting fruit tea as well. Is that the peppermint and licorice? Need to try that. I've got a peppermint, but it's not licorice as well. So as well as approving accounts, throughout the year, throughout the financial year, you would get financial reports and understand where the organisation was in terms of what you hope to be, overspends, underspends, what you would do with any underspends, what would those go to fit in elsewhere, what would you do if you're spending too much money, what action do you have to take. You don't work in a vacuum. If you're running an airport, you probably want the bus company to come and pick up your passengers, or have taxi ranks outside, or any one of 100 other organisations that you might be working with. So you would have to do that. So if you're the kind of person that goes on and just shouts at people, you probably don't want that person on your board, because when you go and talk to them, you're not exactly going to promote the best working relationship. So that's an actual example of the kind of skills that people are looking for to serve on a board and to provide that governance role for an organisation. I'll miss out the last one because that's just added to every single job ad as far as I can tell. So we're happy with that before we go on. Okay. So as I've said, governance and management are very different. And in fact, there should be that separation. So the board sets the direction, the management delivers that, and it's up to the management to make that choice. Management must be free to manage. On the other hand, if management aren't managing very well, people in charge must be free to change or get rid of the management. So that again, there is a balancing act there. So there has to be that line. Here's the policy. Here's how we're going to implement it. Different people are responsible for each of those things. And in fact, that's carried over into some of the, there are organisations that try to promote this kind of thing and try to make sure that things are done properly. And one of them come up is the COBIT principles, and we'll actually talk about those later on, and you'll have seen them in the governance, risk and compliance frameworks. We have COBIT and ITIL. So COBIT is very clear on that split between governance, excuse me, and management. That doesn't mean management get a free rein. Governance, you're still in charge. So there will be monitoring going on. So there'll be regular reports on what's happening and when. And of course, part of reporting is trying to decide what you need and how often and what should be in it. So Timaeus and comprehensive information. So what does Timaeus mean? Well, there's no single answer. If you're talking about sales, so if you're on the board of a company, you might want monthly sales figures. You might want weekly sales figures. I'm not sure. If you are in that same company and you are opening these shops, do you really want a weekly update on the search for the new shop? Do you really want a weekly update on how they're fitting it out? No. Monthly, quarterly might actually even be fine. And again, it's about getting that balance. It's about understanding what you're getting the information on and how often you need to update it. Because of course there's a cost involved in all of these things. People have to research the information, create the information and disseminate it. And there's also a risk of information overload. If you get all the information all the time, how do you identify which bits you actually need to concentrate on? So it's really important when you decide on these things, what you'll get and when. And it is something that those in a governance position will decide on. So it's up to you to say, no, I want financial information weekly, but I want HR information quarterly. And you're perfectly at liberty to change that as you move on, depending on what's happening in the organisation. Regardless of what you decide is the right amount of information and how often, there will be formal reporting. So it'll appear on the papers of the board, for example. So there's a clear note that this has happened and that you have been shown this information, including the risk report. And we'll talk clearly about risk in the next section. But risks are something that will be closely monitored. I saw a thing in the paper this morning about a bike company. And one of the things on that bike company's risk register will be foreign sales because of Brexit. And their sales have gone down 25% because of Brexit. So that would have been a risk, and there would have been thoughts as to what they are going to do if that risk happened. If you're selling 25% fewer bikes, do you need 25% fewer people? If you're selling 25% fewer bikes, do you need the same size of industrial unit that you're in? So all of these risks will be shown in the risk register, and those will be fed back. And again, I'll show you examples of those later on. One of the ways that we do this, and part of the reason that it's in an IT-based module for those of you that are doing cybersecurity, is, as I said last week, this is the sort of stuff that's very easily done on computer. If you decide we are going to have monthly sales figures, well, it's quite possible you've got an accounting package that can very easily get that out and put it into a report, and that's going to be part of the IT function. And those sorts of things will also be available not just for compliance. So I mentioned last week about how long you can allow somebody to send something back if you sell it to them over the internet. So the compliance is what the law says. You have to allow them 14 days. But control might be how you set it up internally. Let's get an advantage in all our competitors and allow people 30 days. It's entirely up to you. But because you have those in place, you don't want to have to continually say, have we checked that? And again, that's where the computer part comes in. Most of the information comes into the computer. It's next to no work to get the computer to sort these things out on a daily basis. If you're working in a call center, you probably see a big board up at one end of the screen that says number of calls, how long people have to wait, number of rings, how long people are on the phone for. All of that information isn't just quarterly, monthly, or weekly, it's minute by minute. And we can do that because all this stuff is in a computer system. But the same sorts of systems can get different information at different times for different reasons. And that's really helpful. All of this sounds like a lot of hassle and a lot of work, and of course it is. And some organizations, because of that, try and avoid doing it, which is a really bad idea. Whoever that is, would you mind turning off your mic, please?
Okay.
By putting this sort of stuff into place, by having effective governance, it means you don't have the reputational problems. And again, you only have to look at the news to see the sort of reputational problems the UK government's having just now with all its bad governance decisions. So the reputational risk builds and builds and builds. If you have proper governance, you have an organisation with integrity, and people want to deal with organisations with integrity. It is something you look at. You can't hire a plumber without speaking to people that you know, saying, do you know a good plumber? And you don't just mean somebody who knows how to change a pipe. You mean somebody who turns up in time, who doesn't make a mess, who has a good reputation of doing a good job. The organisation has then got integrity. The same thing happens on a more macro level. You want to deal with organisations that have that kind of approach. And if you then do that, all the stakeholders start to trust you, whoever those stakeholders may be. So those were good, sound reasons. But as I say, not everyone would always do that. And part of the problem we had was that when they didn't do that, there was no effective punishment that came across them. Now, some of you will know some of these names, some of you will know others. Just to give you an example, I'll not go through them all. There's links there, and you can follow those at your leisure. But to give you an idea, Enron was a US energy provider, and one of the things that it would do is it was able to charge depending on the requirements. So if people needed a lot of power and there wasn't much about, it could charge more. You know, that's just the market, isn't it? If something's scarce, you can charge more for it. Well, yes, except that Enron had another side to their business, which was also creating energy. They owned power plants. And at some point, some bright spark went, oh, do you know something? See if we close down our power plant, the prices will spike and we can charge more. And actually we sell less, but make more. So they would deliberately manipulate the market in order to ensure that the energy that they sold was at the highest possible cost. Now, not surprisingly, that had huge consequences for the people that bought the power. You know, blackouts, brownouts, all that kind of stuff, as well as, of course, it costed them a fortune. The other minor detail about that approach was that it was illegal. And eventually they were found out, and there's been literally multiple documentaries about Enron and what they did and how it happened. And of course, one of the things you're supposed to do when you run an organization is have proper oversight. And that's not just the internal governance, it's external. So in this particular case, you quite often hire external accountants to go over your books, to go over your processes, and to say, yes, you're doing it okay. Enron hired Arthur Andersen. But they also hired Arthur Andersen to do all sorts of other work for them. And Arthur Andersen thought, do we point out that this isn't exactly right? Or do we keep quiet and still take in all our other consultancy fees and all the money that we're making off Enron? They chose the latter. And when Enron were found out, Enron didn't just go down. Arthur Andersen, which used to be part of what were called the Big Four, so the Big Four accounting companies, Arthur Andersen went down with them. I have no sympathy, I have to say. There's been similar scandals elsewhere. So those were approached and rules and regulations were tightened in some places, but not others. So in America, for example, there's something called the Sarbanes-Oxley Act that tightened all these rules around governance and around finance. Part of the reason I bring that up is because clearly many of you will be working for organizations that aren't just national, they might be international. So some of the stuff that we're talking about, you don't just have to conform to Scottish regulations or UK regulations. There might be international regulations that you also have to conform to. Sarbanes-Oxley, if you're dealing in America, is one of them. And the second reason I point it out is that America decided that there needed to be more legislation. The UK decided that they went to school with the people that ran these companies, and it was just a bad apple, and of course it could never happen again, so we don't need to have legislation. We have regulations instead. And again, I'll leave it up to you to decide whether or not you think that's a good idea or not. So, any questions about that? Okay, so I said that there would be tasks every week that I think you should carry out. And here's the first one. And it's simply to research the governance structure for UWS. Now, for those of you guys that are here on CPD, I've only said UWS because it gives our students something to focus on. It's clearly the university they attend. You might find it more useful to research the governance structure for your own organisation. I'll leave it entirely up to you. The key point is that you start to figure out where the responsibilities are and where those lines are between governance and management and who does what and when. That's the important part. So whether you do it for UWS or whether you do it for your own organisation or whether you do it for, whatever, I really don't mind. It's entirely up to you. For those of you that are doing it on UWS, then you might want to remember the words court and Senate and use those as part of your research. That will be a good starting point. Okay, so that's us with the presentation. As you know, these are all on your OneNote document. So there's the governance presentation that we've just gone through. All the stuff is there. And I think I've said before, it would be really helpful if you read next week's before we do this week's. So let me stop the recording there.